Hi, this is Mark Keith with the Resource Materials and Technology Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Today, we're going to talk about emergency preparedness for families of children who are deaf or hard of hearing. The very first thing that we want to talk about are awareness issues. For a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, communication matters. It matters for every child, but this is even more important for those kids who are deaf or hard of hearing. Remember, children who are deaf or hard of hearing often miss spoken communication. In an emergency situation, this is critical. It is so important that the child have access to and understand everything they need to know about the different possible emergency situations that could arise. So, for children who are deaf or hard of hearing, you need to understand that they may not be aware of the answers to what we call the W questions, the who, what, where, when, and why questions. Those questions are things that you're going to need to answer and make sure the child understands as you move forward with discussing and preparing for emergencies. Again, for emergency preparedness, this is a huge concern. When we get into emergency situations, that's not the time to be holding a discussion as to what I need to do or where I need to go or who I need to talk to. Those are all things that need to kind of be in place in the child's mind already, so they know what to do and they understand that they can do it without further direction. Because let's face it, in an emergency situation, you may not be there or be able to give those directions at the time, even if you wanted to. The other factor in this is, how does anybody deal with stressful situations? Well, we cope with those situations through two things. One is by having information available and knowing that information. The second part is planning, to rehearse, to practice, to have a method in place so you know and the child knows what to do when something happens. One of the things we'll talk about as we go through is the concept of practicing those situations so that the child develops that kind of that muscle memory where they know, in this situation I do this. You don't want them freezing in a situation where there's a fire or a tornado or a hurricane or some other kind of emergency that requires them to move and think quickly. We want them to be able to act when needed independently in these situations and to know how to do what they need to do to keep themselves safe. And for this, really, awareness is the key. So let's look at some things you have to consider in emergency preparedness issues. The first question you really need to ask yourself is, how can I prepare my child for emergency situations? Well, for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, we come back once again to the communication issue. Ask yourself a very basic question. Does your child understand the vocabulary of emergency preparedness? Do they understand what the word emergency means? Do they understand what the word evacuate means? Do they understand what the phrase take shelter means? Shelter is not a word you hear very often except in the context of an emergency situation. So it may not be vocabulary that your child has had before. Do they know what a tornado is? Do they know what a hurricane is? And there are other words too. So think about the vocabulary the child needs to know and start there. It's if you can't communicate what the issues are and a child doesn't understand what the issues are, there's no way the child can plan or prepare or understand what they need to do or why. The next question you need to ask yourself is, does the family have a plan? And not just a plan in your head, but a plan that everybody understands and knows. And this is not just dealing with one general plan, but for different situations. For instance, in a tornado, is there a place in the house that's a safe room? In a hurricane, do we understand why we're packing up maybe stuff to leave if we're being evacuated? Or we're putting shutters up on the house or something like that. So do you have a plan? The next question is, does the child understand the plan? Let's be honest, in emergency situations, a lot of times individuals have to act independently, whether it be timing or situation or just, just whatever other factor that may impact them. It may be that that child's got to be able to do what they need to do independently of you. You can't always count on being there. Do they understand the plan? If they're home from school, say you've got a child who comes home from school by themselves and there's a tornado warning come across the TV and you're at work, does the child know where to go in the house for safety and what to do? Those are kind of things you have to look at. If there's a fire in the house, what do they do? Have you practiced the plan? It's all well and good to talk about a plan, to sit down and discuss it. But honestly, if you haven't practiced the plan, chances are nobody's going to remember it in times of great stress. There's an old adage about developing what they call muscle memory, which is you develop by doing things repetitively, by practicing them, by doing them again and again. This is one of those situations where you need to develop that muscle memory, where everybody knows what to do and they just do it because it's a habit, because they understand this is what they should do. So you've got to practice it. And it may feel silly sometimes to be running around when nothing's going on or doing things when nothing's going on, but that practice will help if and when an emergency actually does happen. Have you prepared your home? Have you done the things in the house so that the house is ready for an emergency? I always look at the difference between some types of emergencies. A hurricane is a long-term emergency. Usually you have several days warning at a minimum to at least think about and begin to prepare the home. But other things like fires and tornadoes, those aren't long-term emergencies. Those are things that happen fast. So you can't wait until something's imminent before you decide to do something. That's something you have to plan for and do in advance. So have you done those things? And then to think, what else can I do? Is there something I'm missing? It's always the best last question you ask. What am I missing? What do I still have to do? What did I forget anything? And that way you kind of cover all your bases. As we've already talked about, having a plan is critical, and that is really the first step you've got to take. You've got to create a plan, or really plans for each type of emergency situation. Second, you've also got to be able to explain to your child about the emergency situations and what they mean. You don't have to do this simply by yourself. There are a lot of really, really good resources out there. Everything from the Office of Human Services to the Florida Department of Health, FEMA, and also Sesame Street. Sesame Street has a lot of really good information for children that you ought to take a look at. FEMA as well has tons of videos out there that can be helpful for all ages. And the other sites, they have videos and resources as well that you might want to pull up. They'll give you information on not just explaining these kind of emergency situations, but also give you tools that you can use to help create your plan or look at things you need to do and how to do things with your family in those situations. So anyway, it's worth looking at, and I'm gonna kind of give you a second if you want to copy down these websites, or to maybe take a screenshot with your phone if you want to. That way you can go back and access them at your own time. Okay, so let me go ahead and move forward at this point. We will move on to our next slide. Third, you must explain to the child that the family has a plan to keep everyone safe. This is important for several reasons. First off, remember the conversation we had earlier about communication and the importance of communication. Don't just assume that the fact there's a plan is known by everybody. You need to make it clear. Also, understanding that there is a plan gives everyone the power to act. You move into somebody where you're actively participating and taking on the situation, as opposed to just standing there and letting the situation hit you or overwhelm you. It gives some sense of power and control to the person. Now, for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, it's also good to ask questions to make sure the child understands what's going on and that they understand clearly. Don't necessarily just ask yes or no questions. Ask the child to explain things, so that way you also understand and can see that the child truly is grasping the information you're giving them. They're grasping that plan. Fourth, teach the plan. You've got to make sure it's communicated clearly and is understood. And I'll refer you back to number 3 in the discussion we just had there. No plan works if it isn't clearly understood. Fifth, practice the plan. Practice makes perfect and helps everyone remember what to do. Think of it as creating muscle memory. The more times you practice something, the more you begin to be able to do it without having to think about it. You just know that this is what you do and you go do it. Remember, throughout all this, communication is the key. Okay, let us continue this discussion about information. As we talked about earlier, different emergencies require different responses and different plans. So, as you're developing these plans and working to teach the family, do not try and do all of them at once. All this is going to do is confuse everybody. Nobody's going to know what to do when the time hits, because everybody's going to have all these plans in their head and they're not going to be sure which piece and part goes to which plan. So my suggestion is to start with the most immediate concerns. For an example, in Florida in December, you're more likely to get a brush fire or a fire in the woods than you are a hurricane. You're past hurricane season, but you're moving into the beginning of the drier season where fires are more prevalent. House fire. Chances are you're going to have a bigger chance of having a house fire than you are a tornado or a hurricane hitting you. This is what I mean by prioritization. Start with those immediate concerns. So that's up to you, what you consider the most immediate or the most pressing concern, and build a plan for that and start that. Practice it. Then maybe a couple of weeks later, do the next one. Or even a week later, whatever, just as long as everybody in their head can keep everything separated. I do this when. Another thing you've got to remember in terms of information is everybody needs to know how any kind of specialized equipment works. Now, of course, this can be age-driven. Most 4 or 5-year-olds are not going to handle a fire extinguisher, for instance. But if you've got a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old child, they ought to be able to handle a household fire extinguisher if need be, depending on the situation, again. So remember to instruct everyone how to use this kind of equipment. First off, a fire extinguisher, obviously, basic household safety tool. Secondly, a weather radio. And when we're dealing with a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, we're talking a weather radio that has an alert to light it. Most of them obviously have sirens or beepers or something that goes off to make a loud noise to attract the attention of people in the building or in the room. For a child who's deaf, child who's hard of hearing, you need that, of course, the noise for everybody else, but you also need one that has some kind of light that will flash or turn on to indicate there's something going on that they need to be aware about. Also, too, it needs to be in a location where that person or that child can see it. For a child who's deaf and can't hear that beeper, if they can't see it, it does them no good. Also, it needs to have something like a printout on it where they can read the information. We have a severe thunderstorm warning. Okay, I don't want to be outside playing. Or we have a tornado watch. I need to be aware. Or I have a tornado warning. Okay, I need to do what I need to do quickly to go to safety. To get to my safe room or whatever I need to do, whatever the plan is. Alarms, fire alarms. Basic thing. But for a child who's deaf, that noise alarm may not be the appropriate type of alarm. They may need what's called a strobed alarm, or when it has a strobed light on it, a very bright strobe light that will wake them up or alert them that something's going on. Most homes don't usually come equipped with that. Normally they come equipped with sound ones. So it may be that you're going to have to switch them out. It doesn't have to be all of them all at once on the same day, but where's a child going to be most likely to not recognize if there's a fire or some kind of emergency involving smoke or fire? Their bedroom. Start there. Replace that one. And then when you get to the next pay period, if you have the money to do it, replace one in the family room and just work your way around the house. So eventually they're all strobed fire alarms. They're not overly expensive. They're not cheap, but they're not overly expensive. So, but it's a safety issue. Another thing that people don't think about is closed captioning. Have your closed captioning on TV. If there's an emergency and you are not home, usually a weather emergency of some kind, severe thunderstorms, tornadoes, whatever, it will be on TV. They will run information. And it will be, if the weather people pop up on the screen, it will be captioned so that the person in the room who may be deaf or hard of hearing can read it and understand what's going on, and they can then make decisions on what they need to do. So anyway, make sure folks know how to use the equipment that's available in the house should they need it. Okay, now let's start talking about preparing your home. Well, some of this is going to sound repetitive because it is a little bit, but we go back to it because it needs to be emphasized. So first, as with any child, start teaching as young as possible. The reason for this is you want them to grasp as much information as early as possible. Okay? You don't want to wait till they're 8 or 9 or 10 years old to start teaching something and start at ground zero there. You want to start back when they're 2 or 3 and begin to get this concept into their head that there are emergencies, there's emergency preparedness, and that way as they get older they can expand and grow their knowledge and abilities to respond. But they have to understand the concept first. Remember that age and ability impacts independent action. You aren't going to expect a 3 or 4-year-old to respond the same way a 12 or 13-year-old is going to respond in an emergency, and you're not going to expect them to be able to do the things the same way. It's obviously far different for a 3 or 4-year-old than it is for a 13 or 14-year-old, and all those little steps in between. Each child as they get older usually can do more. Another thing to consider is what kind of disabilities the child has. If they're deaf, obviously they're not going to hear much. If there's a physical disability, that may impact their ability to do something or to act in a particular way. So be aware of these things. And then look at each kind of emergency and decide what kind of equipment is necessary. And you've got to consider the deafness in the decision-making process. Think about it. Can my child hear this? Can they see it? Can they access it? If the answer is no, then probably you need to look for a different kind of device or a device that's modified a little bit differently than that one. And also consider how the child can access or use the device itself. Again, we get back to this age thing of some children, some children are younger, some children are older, and it changes their abilities. But it's something to consider whenever you're buying equipment or a device of some kind, or when you're preparing the house. So let's look at some of these kinds of devices and some of these things. First off, the smoke detectors. Do they sound only or are they strobed? And if they're sound, can the child actually hear them? If they're only sound. Weather radio. We've talked about that. Does it have a flashing light or signal? Does it have a readable window for information? Is it in a location where it can be seen? Fire extinguishers. Does the child know what they are and what they're used for? Just because you have a fire extinguisher in the house, most of us understand what that means and what it is. But you'd be surprised, there's a lot of children, unless you're able to explain it to them, they're just going to know there's this red thing that's in the kitchen. They're not going to understand what it's for or how it's used, because let's be honest, most children have never seen a fire extinguisher in operation. They're not going to understand what it is. Hurricane shutters. Does your child understand what they are and why they're being used? Again, if I'm a child who's deaf or hard of hearing and have never been exposed to anything like that, and I see my parents or somebody putting big metal covers all over the windows and all over the doors, it's going to be confusing if they don't understand why. What's it there for? And not just that because there's a hurricane coming. There's a hurricane coming and it has really strong winds, and sometimes those winds can cause things to break or pick up or move something like tree branches where they hit the window and maybe break the window. So this is a way to protect our house. That's the kind of thing you need to explain. Do you have a safe room for tornadoes? And by safe room, I'm not necessarily talking some big concrete structure, but a place that's in the lower part of the house, towards the center of the house, away from windows, where somebody can go in an emergency. In our house, it's the laundry room. It's fairly central in the house. It's surrounded by a lot of other walls. It's not near. It doesn't have any windows in it. Does your child understand why you go there and why and what you're doing there? If there's a tornado, that explanation, there's a tornado coming, this is a place, so if a tornado hits the house and damages the house, this is the safest place to be, so go there. Also too, in that situation, like in my family, we keep the siloom sticks, the ones that you snap and shake and they glow. We keep those in our laundry room, so that, because let's face it, if you're in a situation where you're in a tornado or a house gets hit by a tornado, even if it's a low-grade tornado, the reality is there's a good chance power is going to go out and whoever's in that room is going to be in the dark. If they understand how to basically crack open a siloom stick and shake it and get light, they at least have some light. Things like this are important. Or if they have a flashlight, understand where the flashlight is. Those kinds of things are important. Again, we talked about closed captioning. Is it on the TVs? In a situation like a hurricane, a tornado particularly, quickest warning is going to be over your TV or your weather radio, but probably the TV. Now the important one. Does your child know what to do when he or she's alone? Do they know how to, fire, get out of the house? Tornado, go to the safe room. What to do if somebody's trying to break into the house? That's an emergency situation as well. All kinds of things. Think them through. Make sure your child knows what to do when they're there by themselves. Because the reality is, in our world, at some point your child is going to be by themselves in the house alone. Hopefully not when they're 3, 4, or 5, but when they're starting to get to those early teenage years or just before the teenage years, when children start taking more responsibility and have more independence, they're probably going to be coming home by themselves on the bus and be home for an hour or so or 2 hours before mom or dad gets home or another sibling gets home. Do you have video relay service with 911 if your child is deaf, and particularly if they're signers, but also if they can't use a telephone? Video relay services now can be hooked up to the 911 system, so a person can get on their video phone, make a phone call, and explain that there's an emergency situation. So let's talk now about preparing for house fires. Fire is an immediate emergency. It's localized and often happens without warning. This is the emergency that has the potential to require a child to act independently. Why? Because there's no time to really plan for a fire. When it starts, it starts. Where it starts is where it starts. The question gets to be, what do you do at that point? So, some questions for you, some things to consider. Does your child understand what fire hazards are and what to do? How does a fire start? Basic things like leaving a hot mat or a piece of paper or some paper sitting on top of a hot stove or around a hot electrical appliance. Any of those things can cause a fire. There are other things, but it's the simple ones that we really need to worry about, things that are easily preventable. And obviously leaving paper towels on top of the stove top is an easily preventable kind of thing. So be aware of that. You have to educate the child to understand that doing these things can cause a danger, can cause something bad to happen. Next thing is, what are the signs of a fire and what to do and not do? Well, first off, basic rules that you and I might know, the child probably doesn't. For instance, if a door is hot and you go to touch a door and the handle's hot or the door itself is hot, don't open it. It means the fire is probably right behind it. That door's a barrier. You don't want to open it and let the flames in. Do they understand that in a smoke-filled building or smoke-filled room, if they can stay low to the ground, they have a better chance of getting out because that's where the air is. Standing up in a big cloud of smoke, you're not going to be able to breathe well. You're probably going to wind up with at least smoke inhalation. Whereas if you are down close to the floor or on the floor and crawling, whatever the situation may be, you're still in that little zone where decent air exists. Another big one is to understand not to go back into a building. It's hard. Sometimes there's a pet inside or something else and the child wants to go get it. Well, it's a hard decision, but for their own safety, they need to understand not to go back in. All that does is put both the pet and the child at risk. I mean, and it's a hard thing to do because for a lot of us, pets are family. Or it could be another person. Going back in is not going to save that person by yourself. Most likely, it's going to create a situation where there's two victims or two people the firemen have to try and find and get out once they get there. Again, basic safety. Now, appropriate smoke detectors coupled with appropriate responses will save lives. Keep that in mind. Smoke detectors are in many ways your first line of defense. If you're asleep or if a fire starts on the other side of the house, the first indication a lot of times is going to be the smoke detectors going off. This is why for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, if necessary, to have those strobe smoke alarms in your home. Now, something that a lot of people don't think about. Does the fire department and emergency services know there's a child who is deaf or hard of hearing living in your home? If not, notify them. This is important because it's going to impact how they respond to an emergency situation in your home. Now, keep in mind, not every emergency service agency, not every fire department, not every police department have the same systems set up. Not all of them are as computerized as others, but many of them do have the ability to flag your house in their system. So if there is an emergency, when your address pops up, it's going to notify them that there's somebody there who may not be able to hear them when they arrive. But let them know. And here's the thing: even if there is no emergency, even if the emergency services don't have a heavily computerized system where they can do that, let your local firehouse know. They're going to be the ones responding. They will keep notes as well, and that way at least they've been informed and they know. Important. I think this is really important for you to do. Now, do you have an escape plan? We've talked about that a lot. Have you practiced the escape plan? Now, here's another kicker. Have you practice that escape plan with a pretend fire in different parts of the house. Think about it. Depending on where that fire is, may change how the child and you have to leave the building. It's good practice to let them think about these kind of situations, to rehearse these kind of situations so they know what to do. Now, does your child know about 911? Even if they're deaf, they know about 911. A call to 911 is typically going to get an emergency response, even if no one is talking. Again, we get into those situations where we have to figure out the level of technology for your area. Not all emergency services are capable of tracking a cell phone, for instance. They will definitely be able to respond to a phone number for a landline phone, but a lot of us have moved away from landlines and are strictly using our cell phones. So this may be a little bit more dicey, but some services, some emergency services do have that ability to track a cell phone. So I would take it from the approach of call 911, even if it's off a cell phone, and hopefully they're set up to be able to track where that phone is, and you will get a response. If you call on a landline and you're not talking, you're going to get a response anyway, because they know there's something going on and they're going to respond to make sure that everything's okay. Now, let's talk a little bit about tornadoes. Again, this is an emergency that happens with little to no warning. Tornadoes just kind of happen. They spring up, they do their bad, and then they go away. In Florida, we usually don't get the same kind of tornadoes you see out in the Midwest. In the Midwest, you've got those big EF5s that are basically wipe the landscape clean. Here we get a lot of EF0s and EF1s, which are low-powered tornadoes. They will do damage. They can hurt people. They can kill people, but they're not quite as strong. They're not quite as destructive. So you need to be aware of this. The other thing to be aware of, a lot of these ones pop up in thunderstorms or in some kind of weather event. And a lot of times there may be a watch on, a tornado watch on, but there's no indication anything's actually happening. As a result, a lot of times those kind of tornadoes will just pop up without a lot of warning. So as a result, you need to understand that the child's going to need to have access to that information coming into the house in some form or fashion. Again, that weather radio is critical. The closed captioning on the TV should be on, because local news will break into TV as soon as possible when there is a situation coming, or they will make sure there's some kind of scrolling at the bottom of the TV telling you that there's a tornado in the area. Again, we talked about the safe room. If you identified a safe room, and do you have a plan that everybody's practiced? And the next big concern is, after a tornado hits, what do you do? Do you have a plan to go to different neighbors, or to go someplace, or to find emergency services? Do you understand not to pick up wires, electrical wires that are on the ground, or walk over them? These are continuing safety issues. What do I do so somebody knows I'm safe, or if I'm hurt, somebody knows I'm hurt? How do I handle that? Those are things you have to talk about, and those are things you have to practice. And also, those are the least controllable things. What happens afterwards, because you don't know what the situation is going to look like. But have the conversation. It will help ensure your child stays as safe as they possibly can. Now let's talk a bit about hurricanes. Hurricanes are, for all intents and purposes, a slow-moving emergency. They're not like tornadoes or fires that just seem to happen. They're not there, then they are. Hurricanes, they give you some time to plan. You're very rarely, if ever, going to have a hurricane pop up one day and hit you the next. Usually there's a few days of lag time or lead time in there where the tropical storm develops and it slowly turns into a hurricane, and the hurricane maybe becomes stronger, maybe doesn't, and it has to move to a place where it's actually going to contact land. So it usually gives you some time. But again, communication here is going to be critical with your child. Explain what's happening and what a hurricane is. They need to understand what they're doing and why things are now different around the house. They need to understand, for instance, if you're going to evacuate, that this isn't a vacation you're going on, that there's some danger and there's risk and you need to leave so that everybody can be safe, and understand that they're concerned with the house and there may be some damage to the house, and that's why it's not going to be safe to be there. So you're doing things because you have to, not because necessarily you want to. And explain to them, this is why we're maybe putting up the hurricane shutters, or we're bringing all the outdoor furniture in. Those kind of things need to be explained so the child grasps the concepts of what's going on and why. The same thing too with, I know people who put pictures in Ziploc bags, for instance. Well, why are we doing this? Why would we put all our stuff in bags? Some people use trash bags, for instance, to cover things and give it a little bit of protection from water. Well, from a child's perspective, if they don't understand what we're doing and why, they may think you're throwing all those things out, which some may be important to the child, and they may be resistant and may not want to try and stop you from doing that, as opposed to helping. If they understand what's going on, they'll help. Take the time. I know preparing for hurricane can be sometimes stressful and time consuming because you basically are on a time limit. You need to be done and out before the storm arrives. But taking that 15 minutes to sit down with the child and have a conversation, let them know what's going on, why you're doing things, and help them understand better does multiple things. It makes it clear to them what's happening. It also alleviates their fears. It helps them understand that you guys are doing what you need to do so that everybody will be okay. Also let them see the weather reports and take time to talk about them as well, so they understand what they're looking at. As they get older, you're going to want them to understand those images and understand what it means so they can make smart decisions as they get older themselves. So let's continue talking about hurricane situations. I don't know about you, but I know our family has a hurricane box where our essential papers and documents that we need go with us. It's a box that we keep packed that when a situation arises, we can literally throw it in the car and go if we had to. What doesn't require any real preparation. But the bottom line, it's a hurricane box. It's not a bad idea to let your child have their own hurricane box. It doesn't have to be big, but something, okay sized, reasonably sized, that allows a child to pack some things that are important to them. Is it a stuffed animal, a toy, some clothing, a souvenir? It doesn't really matter what it is, but it's something that they find to be important. It's something that matters to them. This kind of thing helps give the child some empowerment in the situation, some kind of sense of control over their destiny and things that are happening. That's important. Also, give a child duties. Give them some kind of responsibility. You're going to be moving around the house, putting hurricane shutters up or putting outside furniture in, doing things to prepare the house. Give the child, depending on the age of the child, give them some chore or task that they can do. Something that will allow them to participate, something that will allow them to see themselves as helping the family to get ready. It's important. It is important to that child to have that sense of ownership or that sense of control. Make sure you have a plan for hearing aids or cochlear implants. Particularly if you're in a situation where you're not evacuated, it may be 2 weeks. before you can get access to hearing aid batteries at the store, or have maybe a week or so to get electricity back to recharge a cochlear implant or other device. Make plans to be able to keep them functional after the storm, whether that means stockpiling batteries or creating an ability to recharge something. I know when I travel, I keep a small portable battery that I can plug my phone into if I'm not in a situation where I can plug my phone into a wall or into a car outlet. But it gives me the ability to continue to access that device. Same idea with the hearing aids. They need to be able to be accessible, and they're not accessible if they won't work. Also, you need to have a case to protect them. Something that you can put them in. It does two things. One, it protects the hearing aids, and two, it's more visible usually than a hearing aid just laying on a table somewhere or on a shelf. The case is usually large enough that you can look around and go, there it is. I've got them. I know where they're at. And finally, designate a person to be responsible for them. How many times have you been in a situation with your spouse where something didn't happen or got left behind and everybody went, I thought you were handling that. Nobody actually had ownership of it because everybody thought everybody else was handling it. Make sure somebody's responsible, specifically responsible for those hearing aids. Depending on the child's age, it may be the child who can be responsible for their own hearing aids, or it may have to be one of the adults. But make sure it's one person, and that way that person handles it. You can check behind them, but that one person is controlling the situation in terms of where the hearing aids are. That is important too. You don't want to lose those things. We've talked about preparing a child for an emergency situation. We've talked about 3 different kinds of emergencies: fire, tornado, hurricane. There are a lot of other ones out there. Depending on where you're at in the state of Florida, depending on where you live, there are other kinds of emergencies. One that hits everybody at some point usually is some kind of illness or injury. Another is we go through dry seasons and have forest fires here. Flooding. Do you live on a river or a creek that has a tendency to flood on a regular basis? Accidents. Accidents happen all the time. Car accident, somebody falling, somebody getting hurt in some way. There are other kinds of emergencies as well. Like I said, we talked about 3. We could spend all day and not cover all of them. But my point is, a lot of the issues and topics discussed in all 3 carry over to any of these situations, as does the mindset of being prepared, of getting yourself ready, so that if something happens, everybody knows what to do. This helps, one, get a good response if possible. It also ensures that the people involved, there's some element of safety because you understand what you need to do and how to protect yourselves. It's important. So be proactive and plan. Remember that preparing the plan and practicing creates action. This gives empowerment to the child. It makes them aware that they can act in a dangerous or scary situation to protect themselves or others. Communication is important in all circumstances. For our children who are deaf or hard of hearing, explain everything. Make sure they understand. And remember, vocabulary is different. Many times for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, they have a little bit lower vocabulary levels and language levels. So you have to make sure they understand the words of emergency, so to speak, the words of those situations. And remember that planning removes and reduces uncertainty. It creates something solid that the family or the child can latch onto to know if something happens, I've got a way to get out of this, I've got a way to be safe, and this is the plan I'm going to follow. So in conclusion, what do we need to remember? First and foremost, communicate, communicate, communicate. You have to communicate with the child. This is hard for a child who's deaf or hard of hearing, and I don't care if it's in emergency situations or school or with friends, communication is going to be hard. There will be gaps. Make sure everybody, including that child, understands what they're doing and why. Put yourself in the child's position. Think how scary an emergency can be for them. And think about what would help you as a child deal with those situations. Again, take time to plan in advance and take time to explain and take time to practice. In the long run, this will help you, help your child, and maybe prevent a tragedy. Thank you for listening today. I hope you got something out of this training, and please feel free to review it. If you have any questions, you can contact us at RMTC through our website, and have a good day. Thank you.